All right.
Good evening, everybody. This is Tammy Klein. Thank you for joining us on another wonderful Thursday of Film Camp. We have Joel Gunz streaming to us from Montana. He's back visiting, having his vacation. I think that was at Yellowstone, I believe.
Yellowstone and points beyond, but yeah, it was lovely.
Yes. So I am so excited. So I hope you all maybe did some studying, research single set films, because I actually rewatched Phone Booth and I saw The Father and I read up. I just love all this stuff. I mean, I have a background in television and television broadcasting, so I can never ever look at a movie the real way. I get so distracted by looking at things and seeing if the glass was half full in one scene, and the next scene it's empty, and then the next scene it's full. Right? It drives me crazy. So these single set films, when you think about it, they do distract you. But Mr. Joel is going to come and talk to us and explain what works and why it does work, and if there's any out there that don't have not. So thank you, Joel, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And let's see, I think I'll go ahead and take over that screen, their screen.
You got it.
And then go over to the
PowerPoint. Got your chats up. There we go.
All right. And then we have a slideshow. Look at that. Let's see, should I be hiding these chats? Do you see my chat windows that I'm seeing?
Nope. Nope. You're good.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, the title of tonight's lecture is Frames Within Frames, a walkthrough of single set films. And single set films actually have a very long tradition. This is not one of them, of course. This is from the Ten Commandments, and it's anything but a single set film. Because in filmmaking, there have really been two traditions, at least, about how to make a movie. And from early on, for many people, film was all about spectacle, because with film, you could travel anywhere in the world, anywhere in the universe, and take your audience along with you. And so there are so many films that are about grand vistas and big flashy movements and larger than life events, like this scene of Moses crossing the Red Sea from the Ten Commandments. And so that was one tradition, and that worked. But then there were a whole host of other directors who discovered that film also could work in very much the opposite way, that it could be a potent source of quiet moments when you could zoom in on details. So right along with the invention of these big cameras that could gobble up huge vistas, filmmakers in Germany and Russia invented what we now know what's called the close-up, where they could just zoom in on a single detail, such as those lovely eyes of Ingrid Bergman's from Spellbound. So the big proponents of these films that worked in a much more quieter, softer, close-up way were the Germans in the 20s. And the 1920s, Berlin was a powerhouse city of filmmaking. It was at certain points, it may have even been more active and more profitable than Hollywood at the time. And they were just innovating and experimenting all over the place. And they came up with all kinds of new ways to tell stories visually. So one of those was German Expressionism, as manifest in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And the other thing that they invented was the chamber play. And that was a term that was borrowed from the theater. And these were plays, live plays on a stage that just took place in a single room, mostly dialogue, not a lot of scene changes. And so then they transferred the idea of that chamber play to cinema. And in German, they called these the Kammerspiel film. And these movies, such as The Last Laugh by F.W. Murnau, were, they're very small. They were minimal. They focused on details. There are very few scene changes. And instead, they emphasize the inner lives and the psychology of the characters. And at that time, in the 20s, Hitchcock was there. and he was taking notes. He was hanging out with Fritz Lang and F.W. Murnau and C.W. Pabst and all of these famous German directors, and they were just tutoring him in how to make a film the German way, and he stuck with him throughout his career. And he said that dialogue should be just another sound among sounds. Just something that comes out of the mouths of characters whose eyes tell the story in visual terms. And that's very much the Kammerspiel film aesthetic, that you communicate with the eyes or a glance or just a touch, and not just with, just with dialogue. So as you can imagine, this kind of film was, it was kind of the kind of movie that you had to sit forward, to pay attention to. When you watch the 10 Commandments or you watch Star Wars, these images just come at you and they hit you over the head. You can't miss the story. You can't miss what's going on because they're so outrageous. But with these Kammerspiel films, you had to pay attention and you had to notice the details. And, it's funny, that was in those early silents, but that tradition survived. And for instance, and this might sound like blasphemy to say this, but we see a little bit of that DNA in many of today's reality shows. Imagine watching The Bachelor, and we're trying to figure out who the bachelor is going to pick for his next date, and we're watching a glance, or we're waiting for a certain hesitation, and that's how we engage with reality TV. And that aesthetic actually owes a certain debt to these old German geniuses from a century ago. So the Hitchcock did something very interesting. He took these Kammerspiel film, the Kammerspiel film idea, and because this is how he worked, he upped the ante and he said, nope, I'm going to shoot a movie that is entirely all in one set, all in one space. And that was, to my knowledge, I think that was an innovation. Nobody else had done anything quite that audacious. And so he directed 4 films at least that were all in a single set. So you got Lifeboat, and the entire film takes place on a boat. You got Rope, the entire film takes place in a penthouse apartment in Midtown Manhattan. Got Dial M for Murder, takes place in a flat in Maida Vale district of London. And then you've got Rear Window, which happened, of course, took place in Greenwich Village. So let's take a look at the first of those, and that's Rope. And this came out in 1948. And the plot concerns 2 young men who decide to commit murder as just an act they felt of art, just to do it. And then once they killed this person, they deposited their victim in that chest you see in the foreground. And then for the next 80 minutes or so, we watch them serve dinner from that chest to their victims' friends and family and loved ones. They do get their comeuppance in the end, so that's good. But the question is, okay, so why did Hitchcock make this choice? Why did he choose to shoot this particular story in one location? And not only is it in one location, but the entire film was also shot as if in a single take. So in order to do that, because of the way the cameras were built at that time, you could only shoot 8 or 9 minutes of film at a time. And then you would have the camera pan behind somebody's back or some other, a wall or something. And that's where the real change would occur. And then you're back in the action. But the experience of the film as if the entire movie is in one take. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that the film happens in real time. It's about a dinner party. So the whole structure of the film is conversation before the dinner itself, and then what happens after dinner. And so if it's all going to happen in real time, why cut? And the other aesthetic approach that Hitchcock was going for was that these young men, they live in this apartment, and um, they're Ivy League educated, they're upper class, upper crust, and they're also in a gay relationship. And that meant that they couldn't live their lives anywhere, any way they wanted. They had to live in a very special, private, privileged place just to survive. And so what Hitchcock wanted to convey with this single location was the claustrophobia, the entrapment that these young guys, were all of them experienced. Growing up in that privileged, educated atmosphere was like living, you could say, living like a hothouse flower. So you've got beautiful, delicate flowers that can thrive in a hothouse, but if you try to plant them out in the wild, they wouldn't survive long. And that's an apt metaphor for these two guys in their lovely penthouse apartment, stories and stories above the rest of the city. That it's really, it's a trap for them, but it's also a trap for their victims as well. The other thing that happens is when you edit a film and you chop it up, and then you move around from location to location, it's very quickly you can lose a sense of time. When you chop a film like that up, you don't know if the time that has elapsed is minutes, hours, days, weeks, without other cues to tell you. But by shooting in one location in one single take, then you know exactly how much time has elapsed. And so this is good. This screenshot here is a really nice view of the life that they live, that it almost looks like they live in a greenhouse. For these two men, who were gay men, they weren't able to be publicly out, especially in 1948. But it seems that they were out to their friends. It's not talked about in the movie. It can't be referenced at all, of course, but it's inferred most definitely. And it seems as if everyone is in on their secret. So let's take a look at the floor plan to this place. What you see on the right of the screen is an artist's rendering of the floor plan for their apartment, taken from a book about Hitchcock. And on the right, you can see the piano. You can see that in the photo as well. And then in the photo, you can see the chest where the body is. And in the diagram, you'll see that in the bottom of the frame on the right-hand side. And we see the living room, see the hallway, dining room, kitchen. One thing that we don't see here because we never see it in the movie, are the bedrooms. And of course, if the filmmaking had gone there, the movie would have been banned straight away. It wouldn't have made it out of the gate. And but nevertheless, 3 of the characters in the film leave the scene to go make a phone call from the bedroom. And so I just love that mental visual of their friends leaving the room, going into their bedroom to make a phone call, and we can only imagine what they're thinking, and so that's a very subtle way to Hitch was very subtly inviting us to actually imagine what was going through a character's mind, even though they weren't on screen. So here's a photo of the set, and this was Hitchcock's first color film. And so not only was he shooting at a single set, which had its own challenges, he had doing it in a single take, which was hugely challenging. But then they had to shoot the movie with these giant Technicolor cameras rolling all over the place. And so the movie set had all of those walls they were on wheels. And as the camera rolled through, the walls could fly apart, and they had stagehands available to move furniture around for people. in an 8-minute take with the camera roving around all over the place, if an actor was standing and needed to sit down, they had to trust that a stagehand was going to slide a chair under them so that they could sit down without falling on the floor. And so it's almost like this film was in a way haunted by the ghosts of all these stagehands and lighting crew and all these technicians moving every piece of the set around in choreographed movement with the actors and the camera itself. Even in the background, you can slightly see it there in the back, but that's the New York skyline. And they built a real miniature skyline back there. And it was lit with something like 100,000 separate lights. And they had clouds that were made out of spun glass that slowly moved across the skyline as the movie went by, to give you the sense of time, to give you the sense that we were moving from late afternoon into evening and into dusk. So all of this was to give a sense of enclosure, of entrapment, that these young men, these murderers, lived in a very privileged but also claustrophobic and confined world. And I just wanted to read a line from Stephen Jacobs' book, The Wrong House, The Architecture of Alfred Hitchcock. He's the one who made the diagram that we saw earlier. He says, excuse me, "The spatial setup of Rope is that of a Chinese box confinement. Through the single take, the audience is captivated in a cinematic space created in a sound studio, inside of which is an artificial cyclorama of the New York skyline. Inside of that is an oppressively closed apartment. Inside of that is a wooden chest, and inside of that chest is a corpse." So that's a pretty good justification for this, or an interesting justification for this single set film. Here's just one final shot of the skyline, and it invites you to make up stories about what's going on behind each of those windows. All right, here's the next film, Dial M for Murder, and it's probably hard to get a show of hands, but I'd love to know who knows that this was filmed in 3D originally. I think we talked about that a little bit last week, didn't we? And so this is a single set film that is, it's almost perverse in its Hitchcock's choice to film a movie inside an apartment in 3D. Most 3D movies at that time were made in the outdoors. It was about, avalanches tumbling into the audience and space aliens shooting their rays into the audience, and creatures from the Black Lagoon lunging their hands out to attack the audience. And Hitchcock, he was prevailed upon to make this movie. He didn't want to work in 3D. But Warner Brothers had him under contract. He had no choice. So he said, fine, okay, I'm going to shoot a 3D film. I'm going to do it my way. And so he chose this play that had been a big hit on Broadway by Frederick Knott, Dial M for Murder. And he said, I'm going to shoot this 3D film, and it'll be wonderful for you. It's about a perfect murder. Man finds out that his wife is cheating on him. Ray Milland finds out that Grace Kelly has been cheating on him, and arranges for her to be killed. So here's the playbill from the original play. And so the question arises, why did Hitch decide to shoot this Kammerspiel film in 3D? And the idea behind it is that this had been a hit play, and by the time the movie came out, many people had seen it and they were familiar with it. And when you go to a play, of course, there's a contract that you have with the actors. The audience stays in their seat, and quietly, and the actors get to move around on stage. The audience doesn't get to go on stage, and the actors usually don't come out into the audience. But this 3D film shot the story just like a play, except the camera, as a stand-in for the audience, got to break through that fourth wall and join the actors right there on the stage. So, so that's a very privileged thing. That's almost a wish fulfillment. We wish we could go up on stage, but we can't. But in Dial M for Murder, we can. And so we're really made to feel our presence inside that space. And here's how Hitchcock did it. This is the shot that we're seeing here is the famous spider versus fly scene when Ray Milland, Tony Wendis, invites Lesgate over to his apartment, and he's using the carrot of money and the stick of blackmail to get Lesgate to carry out his murder for him. And he's slowly pulling him into that trap. And so his movements around the room follow a kind of a circular pattern. And we get to see all four walls of the film as he's talking. He moves around to his left, and you can see that marked by the red X on the diagram. Then you move around a little bit more as we now see the fireplace. And then he stands up, and we move around the floor a little bit more. And then we see the third wall now with the library. See a little bit more of it. And then we're back right where we started, but this time before this, Tony was in front of the desk and now he's behind it. And so the staging and the blocking and the movement of the camera to capture all that was just a tour de force. And then Hitch closes this bravura sequence with this extreme high angle shot. The camera is so high, it's even above the chandelier. And so that's part of the beauty of a Kammerspiel film, that in these movies, the camera can go anywhere. And even though the actors might be confined in their movements, the camera can go fly up into the ceiling, it can fly out behind walls, it can rove anywhere it wants. And unlike Rope, this film shows us all four walls of the apartment. In Rope, we only saw three because of the limitations of Technicolor filming and the single take and so forth. It just made it not possible to have the same kind of freedom. But here's Hitchcock's comment on why he chose to film it this way. He said, if you're filming a play, be honest and say it's a photographed stage play. All we can do is take that audience out of the orchestra seats and put them on the stage with the players. So Hitch also ran into some challenges shooting this film in 3D. He loved his close-ups, but the giant 3D cameras that they had at that time, the lenses were about this far apart, which meant that you really couldn't go in for a very tight close-up. It just wasn't physically possible. So there's one scene when right before the attempted murder takes place, and we see a giant finger go into the telephone dial and dial M, and Hitch actually had to have that oversized telephone built along with a giant wooden oversized fingertip filmed going into it, just so that he could get the close-up that he wanted. Must be nice to have that kind of budget. So Kammerspiel films, this film, like a Kammerspiel film, is all about the subtle touches, the subtle movements. So in this case, it's just a glance from Grace Kelly. Is it guilty? Is she checking? What is she thinking? It just makes you wonder. Another mark of a Kammerspiel film is that even shadows cast on a door can communicate, or the lighting of a pipe. These kinds of films, for that reason, were called doorknob cinema, because they often cut away to close-ups of things and objects, and they created drama and tension around them. So, of course, in this movie, there is a close-up of a doorknob. And I think that's Hitch's little joke. Probably about 5 people alive at that time got it, but he got it. So even the lighting in this film it's a throwback to that German expressionistic style. This is Grace Kelly coming out of the bedroom to answer the phone call. And so there were all kinds of tricks that Hitchcock did to keep you on the edge. So not only with playing around with shadow and light, but even the editing was very unconventional. It's a very talky film, lots of dialogue, but very rarely do you see the POV shot, the reaction shot, and then the reverse shot that you normally see in dialogue scenes. He was placing the camera all over the place just to keep us on our toes, to keep us off kilter, keep us guessing. And just as we can't separate Rope's single set structure with the fact that with the creative choice to shoot it in a single take, the 3D effects in Dial M for Murder are so intrinsic to the story that it's really a different movie if when you see it flat. And so one of the problems with 3D filming, though, is that it's not actually 3-dimensional. Of course, there's no depth to it. Instead, what you see in a 3D movie are layers. And in those layers, rather than creating an illusion of depth, they actually create, an impression of separation. And I believe that Hitchcock was using that fact to further his storytelling, because in this movie, none of the characters connect. They all live in their own little boxes. So Grace Kelly and Ray Milland, they're married, but their marriage is kind of toast at this point. She's taken a lover, but she's broken up with him. So they don't have the connection they once had. And of course, the inspector shows up and he's like a visiting angel. He's from another realm. And so I think Hitch underscored that separation and that compartmentalization with a repeating motif that you could call a fence motif. So this is the beginning of the film. And particularly with your 3D glasses on, you would see one layer with the fence and the 2 sailors, standing next to it. And then the rear layer of the Queen Mary pulling in. See the same thing later on. There's a famous shot of this conversation, and we've got a fence of bottles in the foreground. And once again, it's as if they are sort of fenced off from us or from the rest of the world. Of course, the murderer hides behind that curtain. And so it's got that same sort of hiding behind layers, compartmentalized. And so that all that sense of separation and isolation is shattered during the attempted murder scene. And there's the famous shot. This is the only scene, about the only moment in the film where you really get that spectacular, gratuitous 3D effect that the murderer Lesgate has pushed Grace Kelly onto the table. And it's as if she's reaching out into the audience for imploring us to help her. But of course we can't. And so she's fumbling around until finally her hand discovers those scissors, and she puts herself out of danger. But that underscores all of that isolation and compartmentalization. In that moment, what we want to do is help her, but obviously we can't. So here's a side note. If you're a fan of Dial M for Murder and you're a fan of Columbo, people have often remarked that there's a lot of similarity between the two. The TV show Columbo was often about a perfect murder. You had a smarty pants bad guy who thought he could get away with the perfect murder, and he plays cat and mouse with Columbo. And Columbo, on the other hand, plays dumb, and that's a ruse to get to trip up the killers. And in that, he's a carbon copy of the inspector in Dial M for Murder. So, question is, what's up with that? Coincidence? I think not. The original Columbo story appeared in Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine, March 1960. And the writers of that story created that character. And then from that story, they wrote a stage play. Then they wrote a made-for-TV Chevy Chase Theater show in 1963, I think. And kept developing it until they made a made-for-TV movie, and then 1971 the TV series was launched. So I would say that Columbo was probably very much inspired by the inspector from Dial M for Murder. All right, so here's the next one. The year is 1959, and the actress is Audrey Hepburn. And Hitchcock was working with Audrey Hepburn, had tapped her to star in a movie. He was excited to finally get to work with a cool brunette and not a cool blonde. And that movie was No Bail for the Judge. And they were in pre-production on it, and good to go. And Hepburn, for her part, was excited to change her image. This was going to be a dark Hitchcock movie. She had been known for light comedy and musicals, but she wanted to expand her repertoire and take on some heavier, darker roles. And she wanted to work with Hitch a lot. This is a shot from, you might remember this from Charade. So what happened? Well, they were getting ready to go into pre-production on No Bail for the Judge. She had signed the contract, letter of intent to go forward with it. And she had also been 3 months, or in her third trimester, pregnant. And sadly, she had a miscarriage. She lost the baby. And as you can imagine, that was very traumatic for her. So she pulled out of production on the film. She just couldn't go on with it. And as a result, Hitchcock had to change gears, and that's why we have another movie called Psycho. So if this film had gone ahead and been made, we might not have Psycho. There's that. But Hepburn, she was disappointed, and so was Hitch. They tried to get it together to shoot the film anyway, but it just didn't work out. Stars didn't align. But for years after that, Audrey Hepburn wanted to star in a Hitchcock movie. And she did. In a sense, people confuse Charade for a Hitchcock movie all the time. I hear that all the time. What's your favorite Hitchcock movie? Charade. Well, it's not. It was directed by Stanley Donen, actually, 1963. But this is a very long roundabout way to get to the next film I'd love to talk about. And that's Wait Until Dark, 1967. The other Hitchcock film that Hitchcock did not direct. So this is directed by Terrence Young. And you know the story. Here's a collage that I made of the single set. I hope it makes sense to you. But on the far left, we can see deep into the apartment, into the bedroom. And then as we pan right, see the stairs and the front door that lead to their basement apartment. If we keep looking to the right, we will walk into the kitchen. And this story is about a woman who recently was blinded in an auto accident, and she's still learning how to adjust to her not being able to see. Along the way, her husband has unwittingly come into possession of a doll that is stuffed with heroin and possibly other contraband. And naturally, the bad guys want to get it. And so the film is about the bad guys coming into her house, trying to get that doll and terrorizing her along the way. So, but the bigger Hitchcock connection is that this film was written by the same guy who wrote Dial M for Murder. this is also a Frederick Knott story. And you can see the similarities. It takes place in a single space. You've got a woman at the center of the story who has been being victimized by people she doesn't even realize it. And I think the similarities abound. But we just watched this again the other night, and boy, it holds up well. The opening scene might even be a reference to Marnie. So on the left, we see a close-up of this red silk. It turns out that that's going to be a doll with a gash in it. And it's very echoic of the opening shot to Hitchcock's Marnie, which came out in 1964, just 3 years prior. I'll leave the Freudian interpretation of these images up to you, but I think it's pretty apparent. Also, there's the doll that is the MacGuffin in this film. And there's the apartment. They live in that basement apartment that you see down in the bottom left of the screen, 4 St. Luke's Place in Greenwich Village. In fact, this couple lives about 3 blocks away from where Jeff and Lisa Fremont are in Rear Window. So the whole film it's a very sophisticated, very tight film, and it feels Hitchcockian. And what is it about this movie that makes it that way? Well, once again, it's that single set construction, but it's also the moody lighting that Hitchcock would have approved of for sure. Also, the bad guy, Rote, played by Alan Arkin, and he is one of the nastiest bad guys ever to hit the screen. Love this guy. And because he's lethal, he's deadly, but he's funny, he's charming, he's cute, and he's detail obsessed. He's a perfectionist. He reminds me a little bit also of some of Peter Lorre's bad guy roles as well. And I can't help thinking that maybe Alan Arkin, in researching the character, had Peter Lorre on the brain. The Hitchcockian ironies just abound in this film. But this guy, there's the duo that he is also, just as in Dial M for Murder, he's using both blackmail and the promise of a reward to get them to retrieve the doll for him. And but one of the things that I just love about this movie that it corrects about Dial M for Murder is that in Dial M for Murder, the Grace Kelly character she has very little agency. She's a victim of circumstances, and she isn't given much of an opportunity to fight back. But in Dial M for Murder, it's up to Audrey Hepburn, her character's name is Susie, to save herself, because nobody is going to come to save her. And she does, and she uses courage and intelligence, and she finds her personal power. She finds her agency to finally save herself. I think there's an interesting Hitchcockian irony as well, that she's blind, and yet her primary enemy is this guy who wears these blind man glasses. He looks like one of the 3 blind mice. All right. Now for the next film, Phone Booth. And we just watched this one again the other night as well. And, you know, this is a movie where the single set couldn't get smaller. The whole movie takes place pretty much inside a phone booth. And this film also has a Hitchcockian connection. So there's the author, the writer of the screenplay on the right, Larry Cohen, and there's the star of the film. They're at a Hollywood party on his left. So here's his story, Larry Cohen. He first pitched Phone Booth to Alfred Hitchcock in 1971. That's when he first got the idea. They got together for lunch. Lunch was always this 3-hour thing where they batted ideas back and forth. And one day, Cohen said to Hitch, "What about doing a movie in a phone booth, since he did one in a lifeboat and one in an apartment?" And he said it sounded like a great idea, but they couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. So that was 1971. Finally, late 90s, early 2000s, Cohen, he'd been thinking about it, and he realized that what he had to do was, put a guy in jeopardy inside the phone booth with a sniper with a shotgun aimed at his chest, forcing him to stay inside that phone booth. And once he cracked that nut and he figured that out, he said, well, the rest of the movie practically wrote itself. And so, like Rope, the phone booth takes place in real time. Basically, phone booth lasts the length of a 90-minute phone call. And but the similarities, there are all kinds of Hitchcockian touches. I don't have time to go into all of them today, but just to start, I believe that Stu, the main character, is based on Roger Thornhill from North by Northwest, because both of these guys are PR advertising hacks. And we see them both at the beginning of the movie walking through Midtown Manhattan, directing their assistants to help execute their dishonest orders. Both of them are on the inside hollow, false men. So with Stu, he points out as evidence of that, the fact that he wears a fake Rolex on his wrist, a fake Rolex watch. Roger Thornhill on the train with Eve Kendall, she says, "Roger O. Thornhill, what does the O stand for?" And he says, "Nothing." And that indicates the vast void, that the hollowness that's inside him. Both of them take a fake bullet in order to save themselves and the ones they love. And finally, both of them, of course, have to put their life itself on the line to find true love and to save themselves. So that's just the beginning of so many Hitchcockian touches in this. But I think it was a fascinating film. It was also a great experiment in a new type of filmmaking with asymmetrical editing and frames within frames on the screen to show events happening in simultaneous order. And so one of the positive outcomes of shooting a film on a single set is it forces creativity, and I think that in itself is an important thing. It's kind of like Robert Frost once said about writing poetry that doesn't rhyme, because he always wrote rhyming poetry. He said, "Why would I write poetry that doesn't rhyme? That would be like playing tennis without having a net between the players." And so these creative strictures force us to come up with new solutions and new ways of communicating. And I think that in itself is a wonderful reason to make a single set film. Here's the next one, Amore. And this came out in 2012. And it was directed by this fella, Michael Haneke. He's Austrian. And so most of his films are in either German or French. This film was in French. And I believe that Michael Haneke is the new Hitchcock. And not because his films are dark and scary, although they often are, but because he really approaches filmmaking from the same, with the same attitude and with the same rigor. He once said that the primary principal theme of all my films is the question of what is reality in cinema. And that's a question he's been trying to answer for decades. And that's really the same question that Hitchcock was trying to answer in all of his films. And as we talked about last week, if Hitchcock causes us to look at the person in the mirror, flaws and all, I think it's Haneke, he goes one step further and he forces us to ask if we're up to the task of addressing those flaws And that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so it brings to mind a line from Psycho. And this is Norman Bates in the famous parlor conversation. He says, "You know what I think? I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out. We scratch and we claw, but only at the air, only at each other. And for all of it, we never budge an inch." And that sense of being trapped and enclosed, that's a feeling that was there in Rope, in Dial M for Murder, definitely in Phone Booth. But then the movie that we're talking about now, Amore, it's not like that. It's a story about an elderly couple, and they have lived in this apartment for years, and they're very well to do, they're educated, they're artistic, and they've grown old together. And they're not trapped at all. They're happy to be where they are. The film takes place entirely inside this apartment. And Haneke said in an interview that he specifically wanted to stay inside the apartment because it's a film about growing old and the difficulties of aging and losing your freedom, losing your physical capacity. And it's about old age coming, as Hemingway might say, old age coming slowly and then arriving suddenly. And he said, "I wanted to avoid the hospital and the treatments." He said, "This is fine for TV, but I'm interested in the inner conflicts that emerge from the suffering of someone you love." And so for them, their apartment is not a trap. It's a private island for them. It's an oasis. It's a love nest with all of the pleasure and the entanglements that the term love nest might imply. He says, the director said that, "I would go so far as to say that most people stay together because nobody else understands them. And so this is a space that they can call their own. It makes sense to them and it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else." And that's important as the movie goes on. Here's a scene. We can see that they're well read, and it's a comfortable, sumptuous home. They've built memories there. And another interesting point about the movie, and this is something that Haneke may have borrowed from Rope, that all of the music in this film happens within the story. It's diegetic. That is, there's no off-camera orchestra scoring. All the music is happening within the film. And it's all chamber music because we're watching a chamber play. So it's Schubert's impromptus, Beethoven's bagatelles. But one thing that's common with all of them is that we hear the tune and then it's cut off by the end of a scene. We hear a tune and then it's cut off, and it's jarring and it's kind of irritating. And the same thing happens in Rope as well. Piano playing, and it's just stopped. And it's a reminder that we rarely get to finish anything. It makes me think of Joseph Campbell's famous line that life is like arriving late for a movie, having to figure out what was going on without bothering everybody with a lot of questions, and then being unexpectedly called away before you find out how it ends. And by the way, I loved grabbing these screenshots of this apartment and that lovely light. Haneke is just a wonderful user of light. And I can't help thinking that he might have been, inspired by this guy from Denmark, who also is famous for painting well-lit interiors. And Wilhelm Hammershøi was, I think he was the original painter of light. Move aside, Thomas Kincaid. I think this is the guy. So Hitch had a story that he loved to tell reporters. And when he was in his younger days, he was riding a train, and he was looking out the window and he saw a boy and a girl. They'd gone out behind a brick building and they were back there canoodling and hugging and cuddling. And as he watched them, the boy, you know, he had nature was calling, and so he, from his train window, he watched that boy start urinating against this red brick wall. And he said, but the girl had a hold of his arm and she never let go. She'd look down at what he was doing and then look around at the scenery and then back again at the boy. And Hitch said, I felt this was true love at work. Now that's love. And it's the kind of love that persists, that continues to hold on, even while we're taking care of other business. And that's really what Amore is about, that it's love at work as the couple goes about their routine of, his wife has had a stroke. She starts losing motor control and things go from bad to worse. And through it all, the husband is absolutely devoted and loyal to her needs. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but he's loyal to her in a surprising way, right down to the end. But the camera in this Kammerspiel film, it clings to these scenes. It's also shot in these long, unblinking takes. And so what it does is we're put through the sadness and pain of everyday difficulties of what it means to grow old, to paraphrase Hemingway, and to see true love at work. And it's these quiet and subtle and most human of moments are really, I think they're best captured and they're revealed in an enclosed chamber-like environment. And I think that's the beauty and the poetic power of the Kammerspiel single set film. I think you're on mute.
Oh, weren't you going to mention something about, which reminded me of the movie The Father? You mentioned that in your notes.
I did. I feared that I was running out of time.
Because it kind of reminded me about when you did Amore, that it's pretty much the same thing that they did in The Father. And I don't know, because maybe a lot of these people maybe have seen it, that maybe if you could, I mean, whether or not you have slides, it's hard to tell everybody if you have seen, but if you have The Father, the nominee, but the story is very similar, if I'm not mistaken, just like Amore and how it did the single set.
I was absolutely blown away by The Father, because yes, it's almost a remake. And in Amore, it's the wife has a stroke and then she deteriorates. In The Father, it's Anthony Hopkins who starts suffering from dementia, and it continues to progress. But it's got so many. I just wanted to see if I could grab some of those images because I already deleted them. But
yeah, right. I think everybody's been okay to hang on for a little bit, because I think maybe some of us seen The Father and it may be more recent in our minds about, you know, how it's actually done, and or some people can easily see this movie because it is available to us.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even, you know, they've got, he's got a daughter who shows up and she tries to help, but she's just she's in over her head and kind of useless. In Amore, they also have a daughter who shows up, and it's Isabel Huppert, and she is no use to them. The film, The Father, also takes place inside a single space inside their single apartment. So yeah, it almost felt like a remake. And of course, The Father was up for an Academy Award. It didn't win, but Amore did win the Oscar for Best Foreign Film in 2013.
Yeah, how many, there was also someone that I studied about this movie, is that you didn't know, like, the time, like Was he in the hospital? Was he in his house? You
Mm.
know, and how they changed the scenery to, and then you weren't sure, like the long hallways. And
We're
I know
gonna.
I think we have time, but I hope everybody else is with me on this, just because I just think it was a fabulous film, and now that it relates so much to what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Um, Actually, I do have an appointment that I have to get to, and I apologize for that. But
No worries.
this it's there are two films well worth watching back to back. They're both kind of downers. They're very sad, but they're real life. Yeah, and that you know, we're talking about they're playing with time and space, and you're not sure if he's in this home or he's in the hospital or if he's in his daughter's apartment or whatever. And it felt to me like it was putting the audience through the experience of dementia as well. Like I was left, what is reality? I don't understand. I'm losing my grip on reality here. You know?
We appreciate it. Well, everybody, if you have an appointment, I don't know if anybody has a quick question. I'm just going to unshare and let people go ahead and ask a question. My only thing is, do people do this because more of budgets, or because they want to be creative and then they end up having so much more work, even though it's a lot less money to have a single set, but all the time and the creativity, it's like you get a cheap film, you know, you don't get, it ends up being more work than I guess some people realize.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that better directors set for themselves. You know, it's because I don't think it's necessarily a budgetary thing. I think it's more of a question of how do we tell a story that's going to hold an audience for an hour and a half or 2 hours and keep that, you know, keep their attention. And so it's kind of it's like you know, if you're a piano player, if you're a concert piano player, everybody has to learn Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto, right? Because that's the ultimate challenge. And this is kind of like the version of that, I think.
Does anybody have any questions beside myself? I hope you enjoyed this, everybody. You know, applause. It's so tough, right?
Thank you. Yeah, it was, yeah, so much fun.
I'm gonna go ahead and just stop